Hey, welcome back, everyone. I had the pleasure of popping into several of your conversations, and I have a list that Jessica sent me of who's going to report out. So let's keep this one very brief. Um, and we'll start with Julia Camp.
Um, so we did kind of run out of time of talking and spend a lot of time on the first question, but the big thing was, in general, we had folks from New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona, and we all felt like communication was really great. That was federal agencies. That was also, um, like some of the state folks in New Mexico and local governments and all that, and that everybody really seemed to be doing well. The only person who kind of said something was that, it might need to improve a little bit at our Forest Service Region 3 RO, since everything's moving really quickly, making sure they were integrated well. But overall, the theme was communication's been really great. As far as examples of communication, good and bad, we had some really great examples. Someone brought up that the biologists they work with have the knowledge, more of a fire background, so that makes it really easy to move through planning and this, that, and the other, and really know what you can do on the ground, as opposed to, sometimes we have these dreams that maybe you can't really implement because that's not what fire is going to do, because it is a blunt tool.
Hey, Julia,
That really helps.
can you slow down just a minute?
Yeah, sorry, totally forgot
It's
someone's got to
okay.
translate
Yep.
that.
You're welcome, Roxana. I'm on it.
Sorry. I always talk fast, and it was like, go, Julia, go. So anyway, basics there was that having that fire knowledge, and didn't necessarily have to be someone who's fought fire, but just gone out on the ground and had that time and that communication to learn what you can and can't do. And then also someone in our group had worked in an area where you had to coordinate with all these different agencies around them. So just, being able to, spoke to, you need those documents, you need those maps, you need those meetings, you need that face-to-face, all that coordination from beginning to end to really make sure that you can be successful throughout the process, whether you're talking about no matter what the resource, right? So we all have that same understanding. Breakdowns kind of alluded to that sometimes we are talking two different languages, literally, but also our backgrounds are different, right? So being able to understand where each other's coming from. So tools like maps, meetings, all those things are going to be key from starting from the very beginning. And then one of the other things that came up was just like often when it comes to funding, a lot of times, especially with the Forest Service, money comes out of nowhere. So just making sure we have a lot of the agreements and things in place, whether it's partners, funding, whatever, so that we have those in place. So when that stuff shows up, we can take advantage. And then enhancing, I know they all kind of went together. We had a conversation about how Teams and Zoom and all that actually have made it easier to go across distances, right? Be able to talk so you aren't just staring at your phone, or only 3 people show up to the meeting and you send out the notes. But it's also been great post-COVID to actually be able to get together in person, as opposed to, always be staring at your computer. And I think that was really it.
Great. Anybody from Julia's group want to chime in?
And don't talk as fast as I did.
Well, I would just add one thing, and that is right at the very end, we were having a little bit more of a pointed discussion on how perhaps wildlife could inform fire more so in advance, and just really what are the pointed questions we can ask in advance.
Great. Okay, Kat, you're up next.
All right, thank you. I'm definitely hearing a lot of the same themes that have been going throughout I was going to say a week, even though we're on day 2. It feels like it a little bit. Um, just a few high points that one of the things that I thought was really good was we talked about how we're really good at talking to each other in the winter and the spring when when we're planning, but then when fire season comes around, no one has time, and trying to create the space to have more communication on what actually went on the ground, especially during emergencies. So having that feedback afterwards. And we really didn't come up with a solution for that. That was more of a need. And there was an example that I thought was really good. How I know we've been talking about how we have needs for folks that this lack of institutional knowledge is a barrier. And someone from the Park Service brought up that they were updating their RA handbook
And in doing so, it showed breaks in communication, and they could fix that. And so just really gets to that need for looking at our information. That's really something simple that we can do. And I know I used an acronym, an RA, as a resource advisor handbook, but that's something for the biologists that can then really help them do their job better on fires. And then a lot of our time was spent talking about how we do this cross-boundary work and working with private landowners, which was really great conversation. And there were a lot of specific ideas talking on how we can do that better, and resources that are out there in different areas of the country that those of us on the call, we didn't know about. And I was like, wow, this is the power of this event, is having that, like, and that information that we didn't know about. And one of the things were, and I'm not even gonna were PBAs, which I don't know if anybody knows what a PBA is.
Can someone help Kat there? What is PB?
It's Prescribed Burn Association.
Okay.
And they are a community-based mutual aid network that helps private landowners put good fire back on the land. And those are in California, and I guess they're hopefully in other parts of the country. Sounds like a really good resource for all of us. And so I will stop with that. I know we're trying to get through this, so thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else want to add?
Anybody else from Kat's room want to add? Okay. Shannon, you're up next. And Sarah after that.
All right. So I've definitely heard this mentioned before, but for the first question, we talked about how federal agencies are forced to communicate through the Section 7 process. So there's already a good pathway existing there, but it can kind of be a mixed bag when federal agencies are interacting and communicating with local or state agencies, just because there's less of a standardized process there. And then for some examples of good communication, we talked a lot about the Altar Valley Conservation Alliance. And that's a group that has really championed the pros of fire and fire management. And they have 2 meetings a year with Fish and Wildlife to review what went well and to plan for the future. And we talked about just the importance of finding someone to be that champion for fire for you. That'll help you out a lot. And then we also touched on how going through NGOs can be really helpful because they're not confined to the same bureaucratic processes that state and federal agencies are. So they may be able to pull groups together more efficiently, and you may get a better outcome long-term having them involved. And then we also talked about habitat conservation plan through Section 10. That's a tool used by Fish and Wildlife to help Fish and Wildlife work with local entities. Sorry, I forgot to talk slow.
It's okay.
Hopefully it's been slow enough. And then for the last question, we talked about the importance of communicating early and often, well before fire is put on the landscape. We also talked about the benefits of working groups, keep entities on the same page. Very helpful if one person has knowledge or experience with fire. And then leadership, setting an example of expectations for communication, working together, and partnership, and how that can just enhance the culture of communication for boots on the ground. And if I missed anything, then let me know.
Anybody want to add anything to Shannon's? And I'm going to actually switch the order because we haven't had the opportunity to hear really any discussions from our Mexican biologist friends. And so I'm going to let Pepe go next and characterize your discussion for us, and then we'll end with Sarah.
Our discussion in terms of tools and applications, we were talking about, and mostly the tools that they use for fire management are more satellite-based, kind of heat detection type of stuff. And I kind of talked to them a little bit about the severity stuff that's being done in the U.S. So that and so we told them about the information and how that information is in the U.S. And so we started to kind of exchange, and so that's why the chat is full of that exchange of what some of the tools are that are available for Mexico, so that others in our group could kind of see those things. In terms of actual wildlife, the tools is mostly cameras that they're using, and that information is mostly in kind of local reports, so it's not kind of widely available. But the interesting thing about it is that in Mexico, every area that is harvested has a management plan, and so that management plan includes both fire and wildlife as part of the plan. And actually anything that happens after the fire too. So all that information is covered under specific plans, but they're not like bigger plans like in the US. They're more kind of local plans for a specific area that is being utilized. And then they were talking about the different agencies and what they do and the national agencies. And so we just a lot of exchange of information on a lot of sites where that information is housed, essentially.
And what about your discussion on communication, just generally? Pepe, did you touch on that or not really?
I kind of asked about it and I didn't get much of a response. So I guess I shouldn't assume that's not a very good communication, but
maybe they have it all figured out.
Yeah,
we have a lot to learn.
Yeah, so I asked, but I didn't get much of a response. So, but I think that there are some communications, especially between the foresters and the fire people. I'm just not sure about the wildlife. The wildlife is included in that.
Okay. Raul, if we can hear you, do you want to add anything?
You hear me?
Yes.
We were talking about almost the same. We got the same responses as here we were talking about the local aspect, because there are no like national or state-wise plans for wildlife. I mean, it's only local. When something happened in a ranch or something happened in a very specific place, there are management plans, but there's not a national kind of approach for wildlife when they are prescribing fires or something like that. That's one thing. And the other thing that we were talking about is that definitely we in Mexico need to enhance the communication between agencies and universities, because most of the responses that we've got is that some of the people in CONAFOR are doing their own thing regarding fire. I mean, they are very active in what they are doing, but sometimes the communication between agencies is really, really difficult, because the objectives of each agency is different. Right. For instance, how to communicate between CONAN, CONAFOR, SACATA, and all of these agencies that manage natural resources somehow, and forest resources, it's kind of very, very lacking right now, and that's their perception.
Okay.
I don't know about the rest of the people in CONAN, but I guess they are getting the same feeling. They need to communicate more and better. And they were saying something about the management right now is reactive rather than proactive. So when there's some species that is of economical interest, they are just kind of telling them, you know what, you have to go there and control the fire, rather than try to manage for fires in the place where species happen. So it's something like that. So that's mostly what we've got. Yeah.
Thank you, Raul. I know that was difficult to translate, Roxana. I hope you got a little bit of it. We so appreciated that. And it sounds like, to me at least, there are some similarities across Mexico and the US in terms of reactivity need for increased communication, etc. Okay, Sarah, no pressure, but you're last until we move
No
into the
worries.
next segment.
Less pressure because so many things have already been said. So I'll give just a quick summary. So the theme that came up was there are not only gaps in communication between like external agencies or partners and like federal agencies, like there's not a really clear line of communication there. It changes or it was never established. And then there's also gaps within agencies as well, between fire and wildlife. So that was something that was definitely identified over and over again, as well as really big differences between prescribed burning and suppression in levels of communication. Because it seemed like with prescribed burning, not only is that sort of a year-round thing, and there's more time, and like intentional coordination with that and planning, whereas with suppression, it's all very like urgent and a lot of times like wildlife resources don't feel like they have as much of a voice in that because it's so fast paced. Some things that go well with communication was like getting out in the field, like wildlife and fire staff getting out together and seeing things on the ground works really well. There was an example of leveraging leftover funding to bring in fire crews into wildlife surveys, and that was a great like crossover between those resource areas. Again, early coordination in the planning process and also public input, or just like as much input as possible from partners or other staff areas is really helpful. Some things that did not go as well is just in general between fire and wildlife, just differing goals, objectives, and personalities, like differing cultures, especially in suppression. That's just heightened, I think. And also just time, like sometimes you just don't have enough time to do the things you want to do. There's also a theme of communication levels decaying in the past 5 to 10 years, with fire severity and frequency going up possibly. And then some ways that we identified communication and coordination to be enhanced were networking and cross-training. A lot of these things actually were like really similar to day one. I think building relationships and also just like having the time to do that, more staff and resources. There's also a note on a different culture coming out of COVID and still kind of recovering from that. Relationships just aren't the same. And so communication suffers because of that. Communicating objectives and goals more clearly between resource areas. Continuity of staff. There was also sort of this note of the difference between seasonal fire staff and permanent year-round fire staff and how that makes it difficult. And just a cultural understanding of fire as a tool as well. So
Great.
So my team, is there anything you would like to add?
Anybody else from Sarah's team? Great. Great report outs. I hope you enjoyed your breakouts. So